I didn't think anything was strange about her at first. If anything, it felt like the opposite. She fit into my life too easily, like there was no adjustment period at all. Conversations flowed without effort, silences didn't feel awkward, and everything about her felt right in a way I couldn't explain. I remember thinking that this is what people mean when they say you just click with someone. It wasn't intense or overwhelming, just smooth, natural, almost too comfortable from the start. She understood things without me needing to explain them, reacted in ways that felt familiar, like she already knew how I think. At the time, I took it as a good sign, like I had finally met someone who just got me without all the usual effort. When she started asking about my childhood, it didn't feel strange either. It felt normal, even thoughtful. The kind of questions people ask when they actually care. Not surface level stuff, but specific things. What I was like as a kid, what I was afraid of, what kind of things stayed with me over time. And I answered. At first casually, then more openly. Because the way she listened made it easy to talk. Like nothing I said was too much or out of place. And every time I shared something, she responded in a way that felt accurate. Not just polite, not just supportive. Accurate. Like she understood not just what I said, but what I meant underneath it. I didn't question it. Why would I? It felt like connection. Real connection. The kind you don't second guess. But looking back now, I think that's exactly where it started. Not with something obviously wrong. Not with a clear moment you could point at. Just with the feeling that someone understood me a little too well, a little too quickly, in a way that didn't need time to develop. And at the time, I thought that was the best part. After that, it became a pattern I didn't question. The more I talked, the more she seemed to already know how to respond, not just generally, but specifically, like when I mentioned something small from my childhood, something I hadn't thought about in years. She didn't just react to it. She placed it, connected it to things I hadn't said yet. And at first it felt impressive, like she was just really good at understanding people. But then it started to feel precise. One time I told her about a place I used to go to as a kid, nothing important, just a random memory, and she smiled slightly and said, "You stopped going there after something happened, right?" I paused, because yeah, I did, but I hadn't said that part, not even close. I just told her it was a place I used to go. I asked her how she knew that, and she shrugged it off, said something like, "It just sounded like that kind of story," and I let it go, but it didn't feel like a guess. The more it happened, the harder it was to ignore small details, specific reactions, things that felt too accurate to be coincidence. And what made it worse was how natural she made it seem. No hesitation, no second guessing, just quiet certainty, like everything she said had already been confirmed somewhere. I didn't stop talking to her. I didn't pull back. If anything, I leaned into it more without realizing, because part of me still wanted to believe it was just connection, that rare kind where someone understands you without explanation. But another part of me started noticing something I couldn't fully explain. It didn't feel like she was learning me. It felt like she already had. After that, I started paying attention in a way I hadn't before, not because I wanted to, but because my brain wouldn't let it go anymore. Every time she said something about me, I'd catch myself thinking, where is that coming from? How does she know that? And the more I noticed it, the less it felt like intuition, and the more it felt like something already built. Like she wasn't figuring me out in real time, but following something she already understood. I tested it without really planning to, just small things, changing details and stories, leaving things out, saying something slightly different to see how she'd react. And every time she adjusted in a way that still landed too close to the truth, like she was correcting for it without even realizing. And that's when it stopped feeling comfortable. One moment really stayed with me. I mentioned something I had never told anyone before, not even in passing, just dropped it casually into conversation to see what would happen. And she didn't react like someone hearing it for the first time. She didn't ask questions or hesitate. She just nodded slightly and said, "Yeah, that makes sense for you." Like it confirmed something she already believed. I remember going quiet after that, not because of what she said, but because of how she said it. There was no surprise in her voice, no curiosity, just this calm certainty that shouldn't have been there. And sitting there, looking at her, I felt something shift for the first time. Not confusion, not even fear yet. Just this quiet realization that whatever was happening between us wasn't developing naturally. It wasn't something growing over time. It felt like I had stepped into something that already existed before I got there, and I didn't know how long it had been there or how much of me was already inside it. After that, it stopped feeling like something I could explain away. I didn't need more moments to prove it to myself. I already knew something wasn't right. I just didn't understand what it was yet. It wasn't one specific thing anymore. It was the consistency of it. The way every conversation followed the same pattern. The way she never hesitated, never needed time to think, never asked the kind of questions people usually ask when they're still figuring someone out. I started noticing how she reacted before I finished speaking, how she would complete thoughts I hadn't fully expressed, how there was never that natural uncertainty that comes with getting to know someone. And that's what made it feel different, because real connection has gaps. It has moments where you misread each other, where you explain things twice, where you realize you didn't fully understand something. With her, there were no gaps. It felt finished from the start, like everything about me was already mapped out somewhere, and she was just moving through it. And the more I thought about it, the more uncomfortable it became. Not because of what she was saying, but because of what was missing. There was no discovery, no process, just this quiet certainty in everything she did, like she was confirming something instead of learning it. And that's when one thought started coming back over and over again. This doesn't feel like someone getting to know me. It feels like someone who already has. After that, I started looking for something concrete, something I could point to and say this is where it stops being normal. Because up until that point, everything still had just enough explanation to ignore it if I wanted to. But the feeling wouldn't go away anymore. It followed me even when we weren't talking, like my brain was trying to piece something together that I didn't fully see yet. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't just about what she knew. It was about when she knew it. Some of the things she mentioned didn't match the timeline of our conversations at all. They felt older, like they came from somewhere before me. And that's when I started going back through my own past, thinking about what I had shared publicly, what could be found if someone looked long enough, old posts, old photos, random details that didn't mean anything on their own, but together created a version of me someone else could study. And the idea didn't feel abstract anymore. It felt possible. Like if someone really wanted to, they could build an understanding of me without ever speaking to me. And that's when it stopped being about connection completely, because connection happens in real time. It grows, it changes, it surprises you. This didn't. This felt fixed, like I had walked into something already formed, and for the first time I wasn't just uncomfortable. I was starting to feel like I wasn't the one in control of how I was being understood anymore. After that, I stopped thinking of it as coincidence completely and started seeing it as something deliberate, not necessarily in a way I could prove yet, but enough that I couldn't ignore it anymore. And the more I replayed everything, the more one thing stood out. She never corrected herself, never guessed wrong, never had that moment where she said, "Wait, I thought," like people normally do when they're trying to understand someone. It was always just right, just aligned, just already there. And that's what made it feel controlled, like every reaction I had was expected, like nothing about me was new to her. And I started testing it more intentionally, saying things slightly differently, holding back parts of stories, even changing small details to see if it would affect how she responded. And it didn't. She adjusted instantly, like she wasn't relying on what I was saying in that moment, but on something bigger, something already built. And that's when it started to feel less like a conversation and more like I was being observed inside something she already understood. And one moment really stayed with me. I said something completely opposite of how I would normally react just to see what she'd do. And she paused for the first time, just a second. But it was there. And then she smiled slightly and said, "That's not really you." And I remember going quiet after that, not because she was wrong, but because she was right. And she said it with the kind of certainty that didn't come from that moment. It came from somewhere else, somewhere I wasn't part of. And that's when the feeling finally changed into something else entirely. Because it wasn't just that she knew me, it was that she knew a version of me that existed outside of what I was choosing to show her. And I didn't know where she got it from or how long she had it. But I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't happening for the first time in that moment. This had started long before I ever noticed it. It started to feel like I wasn't at the beginning of anything, but somewhere in the middle of something that had already been going on before I noticed it. And that thought didn't leave me alone anymore. Every conversation felt different, not because she changed, but because I did. I was listening more carefully, trying to understand where all of this was coming from instead of just going along with it. And the more I paid attention, the more it felt like nothing about me was new to her, like every reaction I had was expected, and that's what made it feel wrong, because people aren't that predictable, especially not this early. But with her there was no uncertainty, just this quiet confidence, like she already knew how I worked, and one moment stayed with me. She looked at me and said, "You always hesitate before you say something that actually matters." And I froze. Not because it was surprising, but because of how easily she said it, like it wasn't something she had just noticed. It was something she already knew, and that's when it really hit me. She wasn't figuring me out, she already had. After that, I couldn't sit in it without doing something. Not because I was ready to confront her, but because I needed something real, something I could point to instead of just a feeling. So I started paying attention to everything more closely, not just what she said, but what she didn't say, the pauses, the moments where it felt like she chose her words too carefully. It wasn't obvious, but it was there. I realized something that didn't sit right at all. She wasn't surprised by anything I said. Not once. Like there was nothing left for me to show her. And that's when it stopped feeling like connection completely. It started feeling like I was walking into something that had already been built around me, without me knowing that I couldn't keep it to myself after that. Not because I was ready to hear the answer, but because not asking felt worse, so I brought it up. Not directly at first, just enough to see how she'd react. I mentioned something small, something she hadn't known before, and asked how she figured it out. She didn't hesitate, just smiled slightly, and gave the same kind of answer she always did. Something vague, something that sounded right without actually explaining anything. But this time it didn't work, so I asked again, more clearly. And for the first time she paused. Not long, just a second. But it was enough to break that pattern of certainty she always had. She looked at me, not surprised, not defensive, just deciding, and then she said something that didn't make it better. "I just wanted to understand you before I met you." The way she said it was calm, almost gentle, like it wasn't something strange at all, like it made sense, but it didn't, because before I met you meant this didn't start when we started talking. It meant I was already part of something I didn't know existed. And standing there listening to her, I realized something that felt heavier than anything else. I didn't meet her by accident. She found me. I didn't say anything after that. Not because I didn't have questions, but because I already understood enough. There wasn't going to be an explanation that made it feel normal again. So I just stood there for a moment, looking at her, trying to connect the person in front of me with everything I had just realized. And it didn't match anymore, not the way it did before. Not the way it felt in the beginning when everything seemed so easy and natural, because now I knew that natural wasn't real. It was something built, something prepared before I ever got there, and that changed everything. I left after that, not fast, not dramatic, just quietly, like I needed distance from something I couldn't fully process yet. And the strangest part was how calm everything felt on the outside, like nothing had happened, like my life was still exactly where it was before, but it wasn't. Because once you understand something like that, you don't go back to how it felt before, you don't unsee it, you don't forget it. It just stays with you in a different way. I kept thinking about one thing over and over again. Not what she did, not even how long it had been happening, but how much of me she knew without me choosing to show it. How much of me existed somewhere outside of me, written down, observed, understood in a way I didn't control, and that was the part that stayed with me the most. Because it wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the feeling that someone had already figured me out before I even got the chance to be known. And once you feel that, you don't really know where you end and what they already have begins.